Hello, and welcome again to Law in Time of Crisis, Brooklyn Law School's series on how the current crisis is creating challenges for law and how the law in turn is responding and reacting to try to minimize the challenges imposed by the crisis. I am Michael Cahill, the Dean at Brooklyn Law School. I am very pleased to be joined today by David Reiss, Professor of Law at Brooklyn Law School, who runs our Community Development Clinic, among other courses, teaches courses related to real estate. As we think about the economic impact of the crisis more broadly, real estate is really one of the more significant and also one of the farther reaching and more pervasive ways in which there has been an impact of this crisis. Maybe you could say a few words about what that impact has been and why it has been so far-reaching and so intense.
Sure. So just really on a basic level, real estate touches everything we do. We all rent or own a place to live. We go to our jobs in an office or in a store, in a factory, in a warehouse, in a hospital. Pretty much our entire day is spent touching real estate. And so obviously when you have a financial crisis of this magnitude, real estate's going to feel it in all sorts of ways. Lawyers are receiving so many calls from their clients, and this is going to be true both for residential tenants who are facing job loss, and it's going to be true for just about every type of commercial tenant who is facing dramatic changes to their way of doing business. Stores have been shut down, offices have been closed, and this impacts both the operations of businesses, but it also just impacts whether people have the cash flow to actually pay their bills. And this is very true for individuals, and it's to a large extent just as true for businesses as well.
Maybe if we could isolate some of the different kinds of rental situations that we're talking about.
Sure.
Thinking first about, say, a residential tenant, maybe someone who has lost their job or is otherwise facing financial difficulties. Is there a particular kind of advice that a lawyer might want to give, or a particular kind of response that the law is offering for people who find themselves in that situation in terms of their actual home perhaps being at risk?
People really need to understand their rights and their procedural rights. They need to get a sense of their financial position. Are they facing a long-term problem and it's going to be untenable for them to stay in their home for the long term? And what can a lawyer do to help them there? Or are they facing a short-term problem and they were laid off, but now they're able to get unemployment insurance? And a lawyer can help them navigate whether they need to kind of exit their relationship with their landlord or whether they need to access benefits, whether the courts provide them any protection. And the courts have been providing all sorts of protection across the country, having moratoria on evictions and giving certain rights. In New York, for instance, just yesterday, the governor said that tenants can use their security deposits to cover their rent in the short term. So there are a lot of changes, and lawyers can help tenants, residential tenants, navigate those changes. For commercial tenants, it's a lot more complicated.
But in what way are commercial leases different from residential leases in terms of the issues they rise, perhaps in relation to the fact that commercial leases are longer term frequently? Does that create opportunities or additional challenges, or both, for the tenants who might be in the position of trying to negotiate with landlords?
It's true that residential leases and commercial leases are both leases, but it's the same as saying that a house cat is a cat just like a tiger is a cat. Your typical residential lease is for a pretty short period of time, 1 year, maybe 2 years. There's not a lot of negotiation between the tenant and the landlord. And the government will step in and kind of regulate the relationship to protect tenants. And this has been really true for many years now. It's not really a contract. It's really a regulated agreement between tenant and landlord. A commercial lease, on the other hand, could be for many years. It could be for 5 years, 10 years, even longer. And the tenant often puts a lot of money into the space. They will build out the space to meet the needs of their building. And that would be costs that can go into the hundreds of thousands of dollars or even more. So we're talking about a really different economic relationship between the commercial tenant and the landlord. And legally, it's also treated differently because the law doesn't think that commercial tenants need to be protected the same way we would protect a residential tenant. And so really the terms of the lease would really govern. And so that means in a time of crisis like this, really unlike almost anything anyone has ever experienced, landlord attorneys and tenant attorneys need to navigate a very complex, long-term, high dollar stakes relationship to their mutual benefit. And one might think that the tenant has the short end of the stick in this because they're not paying their rent, but the landlord is also really invested in maintaining a long-term relationship with someone who's willing to pay the rent. In the time of Amazon, when retail is getting really threatened by e-commerce, it's more important than ever for landlords to have a relationship with a tenant who can pay the rent going forward.
Are there particular categories of landlord or particular sizes of landlord who are being particularly hard hit by this event? And is there anything the law is doing to protect them and enable them to maintain their livelihood?
I think it's Warren Buffett who said that when the tide comes in, we see who's wearing pants. And I think that's true for real estate investors as well. I would say there's going to be business lines that'll be more affected than others. Those who invest in malls and strip malls and other retail spaces, they're probably going to face much more rapid negative cash flow because they're not going to collect their rent. And that won't be as true for the office space holders. But I think another big dividing line will be between those aggressive, I'm going to buy up a lot of property and leverage it and then buy up more property investors. And then the more conservative investors who say, I want to keep my debt low and keep a reserve fund so that I can handle unexpected contingencies like the one we're in now. And we'll probably see a big shakeout, not just in real estate, but across industry between those who've been aggressive in recent years and those who have been more conservative.
So we talked a little bit about tenants and a little bit about landlords, but the impact of this situation is not only on those parties to the lease relationship directly, but on various other industries and types of workers, the people who maintain the buildings or conduct repairs. Maybe you can say a word about those various other adjacent industries and types of workers who are affected by this situation.
The ecosystem of real estate brings in so many different parties. And as you said, we talked about the obvious one, the tenant and the landlord, but there are the people who work for the landlord. There's the people who provide security, who provide maintenance, who provide all the support that makes the building operate properly. There are the contractors who do the day-to-day and the month-to-month vacancy, who fix the heating and air conditioning systems, who fix the electrical and the plumbing when it breaks. And then there's a massive portion of the American economy that is based on building new housing, the construction industry that has been practically shut down in large swaths of the country as a result of this. So they're all affected. There's a trickle down to them, their employees, their subcontractors. But then, of course, with the defaults, the people who are investing in the mortgages that stand behind a lot of these properties are also affected. So obviously, some of those investors are wealthy individuals and wealthy institutions, but others of them are pension funds and insurance companies that pay out claims on life insurance policies. And so the impacts really kind of go throughout the entire economy in many ways. And then finally, local governments get a lot of their revenue from property tax. And so there's an indirect impact on local communities when property tax collections go down, and that's going to impact schools and parks and hospitals. So really, as with the 2008 financial crisis, the impacts of a crisis like this are extraordinarily diffuse and big.
You're familiar with these issues as a lawyer, and of course you acquaint students with these issues as a teacher through your clinic. Maybe this can be a springboard to a discussion of your current book project that's underway.
So I've been, hopefully this summer, I'm going to hand in to my publisher the manuscript. And I've been writing about the history of housing finance in the United States since effectively the founding to the present. And it kind of just amazes me that really a housing finance system that started with a bunch of neighbors in a little town outside of Philadelphia who came together to fund a building and loan society where they took turns buying houses. They'd each put in a little bit of money every month, and then over a course of years, they'd each be able to buy a house. That went from that teeny little system to our $1 trillion global financing of American homes that we have today. And probably the metaphor that I've been developing that I like the most about it is like, if money is like water and there are trickles everywhere, what we've done is design a system that dams up all this flow of money and then allocates it where it's most wanted. And we've gone from a drought experience in the 19th century for money, with people having a very hard time getting financing. At times in the 20th and the 21st century, we've had the opposite. We've had like a deluge of money going into places and distorting kind of the fundamentals.
Right.
And so the story of money in real estate really tracks the story of America in many ways. And for me to get in the weeds on that has been eye-opening and very interesting.
Paying for the American Dream, I hope, is still the title. That's
Yes.
forthcoming from Oxford University Press. People can look for it on their virtual bookshelves. You're not only involved as a scholar, not only involved as a lawyer, but as some of our audience may know, you, like a lot of our colleagues at Brooklyn Law School, are directly involved in public service at the moment as chair of the New York City Rent Guidelines Board. So you've seen this from a variety of perspectives. I wonder if you have thoughts, having been in the position of a lawyer who has to take the law as it is, and I'm sure there are constraints on what you can do within the Rent Guidelines Board. As you look at rental relationships or the mortgage market, what kinds of law reforms do you think would be helpful? Are there sort of broad-based things that we think we should change in the system that you might not have the opportunity to affect from your lawyerly perspective, but might be able to recommend from your scholarly perspective? Are there changes we should make either in the mortgage world or the rental world?
Well, one leading critique of the regulation after crises is that we always regulate for the last crisis and we never regulate for the next crisis. And my takeaway on the broad policy front is that we probably need to ensure that our high-level regulators have a fair amount of flexibility to address these kinds of issues, because we don't know what the next crisis is going to look like. The pandemic, with the shutting down of effectively the entire economy of whole countries, was completely, at least in the United States, not considered as a possible scenario. And so we kind of tied the hands of regulators a little bit with the Dodd-Frank Act after the financial crisis. But I think this is a good lesson of where we want to give flexibility to combat the unknown.
So maybe the best reaction is not to impose any particular regulatory rule, but just to change the decision-making framework so that there's more discretion by the people who need to implement things as they happen or respond to things in the event.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So changing gears a little bit to think not entirely about the law, but about the real estate market itself. So you're a longtime New Yorker and a homeowner. The market's been up, the market's been down. It seems like the overall trend is that whenever it goes down, it bounces back and is higher than ever. What do you foresee this time around? Are we likely to have a bounce back of the kind that we've seen before in New York?
So as you said, I'm born and bred in New York and Brooklyn, and I can't tell you the number of times that people said that Brooklyn and New York is down and out. The Summer of Sam in the late 70s, 9/11, the financial crisis of 2008, and today. And people say, you know, cities are not made for us. We should spread out and get away from cities. But the fact is, we love cities, and cities are incredibly resilient and powerful, notwithstanding the challenges that we face. When artists want to do art, they want to do art around other artists. When lawyers want to do law, they want to do it around other lawyers. We come together in our individual communities, and then we also cross-pollinate across our communities. So New York is going to bounce back. There's no question about it. I mean, denser urban living has its challenges, but its advantages are are obvious. That there's no better place to be.
Thank you so much, Professor David Reiss. Uh, Delighted to have you talking about the impact of the current crisis on real estate and on real estate law. Uh, Looking forward to further conversations in our series on law in time of crisis.
Thank you.
Thank you.